Courage for Life, Finding Confidence, Hope, and Joy Through Faith, featuring Ann White. What does courage really mean? Many people think courage means being fearless, but Ann White offers a different perspective. Courage is taking a necessary risk and trusting God with the outcome. In this episode of the Talking Addiction Recovery podcast, we sit down with Ann White, founder and CEO of Courage for Life, to discuss her personal journey from fear-based decision-making to a life grounded in faith, confidence, and hope. Ann shares how her own healing process led to the development of the 7 Steps to Courage and the creation of a ministry that now serves individuals in prisons, addiction treatment settings, churches, and communities around the world. The conversation explores the relationship between courage, vulnerability, and healing. We discuss how courage is required not only to face our own struggles, but also to show up for others with compassion, acceptance, and understanding. Ann also shares her 4 foundations of health framework, highlighting the interconnected roles of emotional, spiritual, relational, and physical well-being. Whether you're navigating recovery, supporting a loved one, working in a helping profession, or seeking greater confidence in your own life, this episode offers practical insights and encouragement for taking the next steps forward. Join us for an inspiring conversation about hope, healing, and the courage to move forward one step at a time.
This is Talking Addiction and Recovery, the podcast talking, you guessed it, all about addiction and recovery. Join your host, licensed professional counselor Andrew J. Schreier, as he and his guests break down recovery topics with raw honesty, delving into niche conversations around the topics of substance abuse, mental health, and gambling. We intend to meet individuals where they are on their own personal journey of recovery, with dignity, respect, and compassion. We'll do more than talk addiction and recovery. We'll explore it. We're glad you've joined us. Here with today's episode, your host, Andrew Schreier.
Ann White is an internationally known author, speaker, and passionate Bible teacher. She founded her global ministry, Courage for Life, out of a calling to share with others how God and His Word brought restoration to her life and marriage. Having personally experienced God's grace, salvation, and life-changing power of the Bible, Ann's desire is to extend the same love, mercy, and encouragement to others so they too may be reconciled to God. Ann is a wife, mother, and grandmother. She and her family resides in Florida. Before we get into today's episode, if you're a licensed or certified behavioral health professional, I want to make sure you know about something that could save you time, money, and maybe even a vacation day. Talking Addiction Recovery Podcast is now a platform for approved continuing education provider through IPGGC, NASW, and NADAC, meaning you can earn CEUs just by listening to select podcast episodes. No cost, entirely free. Head over to www.andrewjschreier.com to learn more. Now let's tune in to Ann's episode. On this episode of Talking Addiction and Recovery podcast, we want to welcome Ann White. Thanks for being here.
Thank you so much for having me, Andrew. It's great to be with you and your audience.
We're going to dive into Courage for Life. I'm really interested to talk about it and dive into the book. But before we do, can you just share a little bit about yourself to listeners?
Sure. So I'm founder and CEO of the ministry Courage for Life. It was founded back in 2014, really just out of a passion to share, with others kind of the journey that I took from going from fear-based decision making, really truly all of my life, to truly trusting God, just really diving in and saying, okay, Lord, what step do you want to take today? Or you don't want me to take today? And being willing to make those changes and take those steps. And it's really been transformational in my life. And so really the ministry just focuses around part of it. And the heartbeat of is discipleship, because that's where I began to change. I spent the first probably 20 years of my Christian faith not being discipled and just kind of floundering. So I'm a mother of 2 boys. They're grown, have kids of their own, 6 grandkids. Been married to my high school sweetheart now be 40 years. And of course, with lots of bumps in the road along the way, we've just continued to persevere. And so live in Chattanooga, Tennessee, part-time, and in Clearwater, Florida, and just, love the water, love the grandkids, and doing a lot of writing. God has really had me on a path of doing a lot of resources. So they're biblically based resources that are discipleship grounded, but they're also emotional health because, Andrew, I believe that it is critical. You can't just pour more Jesus on it and expect everything to go away. There are some inner rooted issues that almost all of us have. We don't come through life without scars. And so sometimes we let those scars fester and they just make a mess of our lives and our relationships. And so I did that for many years, learned how to get past that. And that's what I love sharing.
Great. Fantastic introduction. So I wanted your book, Courage for Life, Discover a Life Full of Confidence, Hope, and Opportunity. When I first got it, one of the things that came to my mind was the word courage is used so much. And I even think of like the work that I do in counseling when I work with like substance use, mental health, gambling, families, couples, relationships. And, there's the courage to accept the things that we cannot change. We talk about the courage to do things that you've never done before. We talk about the courage to face fears. And to me, when I got your book and thought about it, it's almost like when we say the word courage, we think everyone has the same understanding of what that means and what that is.
Yeah.
And to me, I'm also a person on words matter. And then we think about that. We don't even take the time to necessarily talk about what it is to have courage or to take courage. Then here you go, you write a book all about courage for life, and you break down so many things about courage. You use quotes about courage, you use Bible verses about courage. How was it that that word became so important, not just for the book, but you also talked about for the organization? How did courage become such an important word in the work that you do and in your life as you write about and share?
I'll start out by saying that I had a dear friend as I was birthing the ministry and praying about the name. Originally, the name was, going to be Walking in Grace, something because I felt like I was. But they said, if you could define your message with one word, what would it be? And I knew it was courage. I knew it was courage. That was just the word. Here's why. I always thought I was courageous. From the time I was a little kid, I wasn't afraid of roller coasters. You could, no, not afraid of heights, not afraid of anything. And I felt like, even though I had a very dysfunctional home life, I felt like I could handle anything. I watched my mom, who was, a codependent, and I didn't know what that word was until about 15 years ago. And I watched her handle very difficult life situations with just this resolve of perseverance, this inner strength. And I thought that was courageous. And in ways it was. But what it wasn't is she wasn't dealing with the issues. She was simply surviving the issues. So to me, courage was about doing things that you were, afraid to do, but just, kind of just with your own grit and your own might, just buckling down and doing what you had to do to survive. What I found through the years, and as I began to deal with those broken places in my life and began to understand codependency and how that was wrecking my life, boundary issues and so forth, I realized, and now today I define courage as taking a necessary risk. That can be a multiple of things that God is calling us to do. So taking a necessary risk and trusting God with the outcome. I always thought I could control my outcomes. I could control my family. I could control all of my circumstances. But what I've realized through the years is that's just not the case. Number one, I can't control other people. I can only change one person in my life, and that's me. And so I had to have the courage to face those broken places, those scars and baggage I'd been carrying around for 40 years at the time, and deal with those so that then I could truly experience that freedom that Christ talks about, that he came to set us free, the abundant life that he wants us to live. It doesn't mean it's easy, but we can have joy in the midst of everything if we heal those and we keep our eyes on him.
And you even go through a whole listing on page 9 in the book, even that says courage means, and there's a whole, I mean, there's probably 12 or 15 bullet points of what courage means. And to me, that sort of helped to get a better understanding, like casting a wider net on really what it means to have courage instead of seeing a word courage and assuming everyone knows what we're
Yeah.
talking about, even though like it's used all the time, it's said all the time, it's put on nice sayings and quotes and pillows and you know quotes that are on nice home decor, office decor, but yet we don't sit enough with it. We think that's what, hey, have courage and I'll help you walk through it, but do we take the time to sit with someone so that they can then understand and even develop what that courage is? And your book seemed to be a way of doing that.
It
Like,
really is. It was surprising to me as I wrote the book. I really, I told God, I felt him telling me I needed to write a book. And it really came from journal notes that I had taken as I was going through counseling, kind of healing from the brokenness that I just allowed to stuff in places of my heart and in my mind. And, I thought they were hidden, but they were really just, affecting every aspect of my life. I was just isolating and hiding them for a while. But I asked God, I said, okay, Lord, if you want me to write a book, I want to write the book that I needed to read. Because truly, as I was searching and
mm,
I had been isolating myself, I was searching for answers. And I had studied God's word from Genesis to Revelation. I was teaching it for 10 years. So I was really immersed because I always heard people say, well, get closer to God and things will get better, right? And so I was diving into that as much as I could. And I was throwing as much Jesus on my issues as I could. But God allowed me to do that. And then I came to the realization that that was not fixing everything, not internally. And so I think the Lord allowed me to just kind of get to the end of myself. And I remember as I start the book out, I talk about being in Israel. I had taken our oldest son, at the time he was in his early 20s, and we were in Israel for a wonderful trip with our church group. And my home life was kind of falling apart because I was wrecking our relationships. Not that it doesn't take two to tango, it does, And so, but the part that I was playing was not healthy. And so our relationship with my husband was, really struggling at the time. And I just remember being in Israel that first night. We're in a hotel room overlooking the Sea of Galilee. And I talk about this in the book and how I was really at the end of my rope. I had tried to fix my marriage, I tried to fix everything in my life, my kids. And I just really broke down and I hit the floor. And I remember just laying out, just putting my arms out. And I just said, God, I surrender. I can't do this. I felt as if I was sinking. And the only thing above the surface of the water was the tip of my nose. And if one more thing happened, I was just going under. And so I just cried out to the Lord and I said, God, what is it that you want me to do? What can I do here? And I remember him saying, I want you to write down the reality of your life. I was a Bible teacher teaching 2 classes at church every Sunday morning, teaching Wednesday nights. I was teaching teachers to teach, actually, on Sunday afternoons, teaching discipleship for teachers. But long story short, I just remember him saying, nobody knows your real story. Nobody knows the brokenness. You're walking into church like you've got this perfect life and you've got this, perfectly put together. And I want you to reveal that to your pastor and his wife. Now, they'd been great friends of ours for about 15 years at the time. And so I did what the Lord asked me to do. I wrote everything down, as raw and as difficult as it was, on a piece of hotel letterhead, just kept writing and writing. And I took it down to Johnny and Janet and knocked on their door. This was probably 8 or 9 o'clock at night. It was after dinner. We'd gotten back to our room. And they open the door, and Miss Janet's so, bubbly, and, she's like, come on in. And I'm like, I just need you to take this. I need you to read this, and I need you to pray for me because I'm at a total loss. And so that was the first time I let someone into my story other than my husband. It was just finally just getting the elephant in the room and saying, things are not wonderful. I didn't know if Pastor would ask me to step down from teaching, because I was a mess. And so they came alongside me. There's more to the story, and I talk about that a lot in the book, and I give you a lot more background as how I got to that point. But at that point, I began praying for a godly counselor because I'd been to a lot of counselors in my life. And I really had not met one that really helped me understand. They would listen to my story and kind of let me talk, but they never really confronted me with the issues that I had and broke it down. And God led me to an amazing mentor counselor that was a pastor. He worked with addiction clinics as well. And then also, he's a licensed family therapist and deals with a lot of the issues that I was going through. So, spent 2 years in counseling, Andrew, and just really learned everything I could. When I dive into something, I dive in deep. And so I did not get my counseling degree, but I could have. So I think that just really changed my life. And so when you talk about courage and you talk about the book, and I was writing the book, I said, God, give me I want to put down the steps that I took to break open those, or really to heal the broken places, but break open those hidden places in my life to where I could truly heal those things that God wanted me to heal and begin to live the life he really wanted me to live. And so that's exactly what I did. And he gave me these 7 steps to courage, which are the steps that I took. And I've been amazed. They are in our prison systems throughout the United States. We have classes going, teaching these 7 steps to courage. We have classes going in addiction clinics, and around the world. We have digital discipleship that reaches all the way around the world, from Courage for Life. And it's been a true blessing. But I was really amazed at how helpful many of these practical steps have been for so many people.
One of the best quotes from your book, it was early on, so you really put one of the best ones early on in the book, but it was courage is about doing what you're afraid to do. There can be no courage unless you're scared. Have the courage to act instead of react. I thought that was so great because I think sometimes people think if I'm afraid, that means I don't have courage.
Mm,
Or if I'm courageous, that means I'm not afraid. And to me, this is a perfect way of looking at that relationship between the two, and
mm,
that there can be no courage unless you're scared. So it's
good.
like you can be courageous and still be scared. It's usually, being able to face and go through what you're doesn't mean you're not scared of it anymore, but it's more of your willingness to walk through it or go through it and deal with it. So I really like how that quote sort of right away challenged like some of the notions we have about courage and fear. And well, if I'm courageous, that means I never have any fear. Or if I have fear, that means I'm not courageous. And those don't have to be the same. So I was really that was one of the earlier quotes that really caught my attention. It's
Mm,
something that I wanted to ask you about as I was reading it, and I have no idea if this was an intention of yours or not. As I was reading it, I was thinking about like how an individual, develops courage in what they're going through, what they're dealing with, what's happening in their life, whatever it may be, right? I talk to you about it could be substance use, mental health, could be relationship stuff, could be marriage things. As I was reading it, I was starting to think too about the courage to show up for others, and how it's not just about and for myself. And here's one of the stories you give that I wanted to ask about. This was later, a little bit into the book. There was an example of When something is too painful to deal with, we simply tell ourselves it didn't really happen or I'll never tell anyone. I once heard of a woman who always referred to her husband as being out of town or away on business. The reality was he was in prison and she was covering it up. She couldn't face the reality of her situation, so she convinced herself everything would be okay if she just pretended he wasn't there. And I thought about that a lot because I worked in settings where people were in treatment for, you know, 60 days, 90 days, and and the family to them is they're away at work, they're gone for a while. But it also made me think, do we also need to have courage to show up for that person if she were to say, you know, my husband's in prison?
Yeah.
Does it take courage to show up for someone else versus how how else we might show up, which is criticism or finger pointing or blaming or shaming, that it also means how we need courage to show up for others so that people can share what's going on without what can be a reactionary response, which is usually not okay. And I read and so I want you to think about that because then I thought about it again when you talked about, and this is later in the book, so that's why I was trying to think like, okay, maybe this is more about also showing up with courage for others, because then you also mentioned about this whole part of when people don't think the same way we do, or they have different beliefs. You talk about how patience and kindness and understanding. So to me, I was starting to think like this isn't just about how do I have courage for what I'm going through or what I might be facing, but this is also about how to be courageous in showing up for others. So where am I with that? Am I way off? Is this like some misinterpretation, or is there anything about it also that reflects on not just courage to show up for myself, but for courage to show up for others?
100%. I mean, you are spot on. God made us for relationships. We if we only needed a relationship with him, he wouldn't have made Eve with Adam, and then he wants us to be in relationships with people. He talks about the one another's. Jesus mentions the one another's throughout the New Testament. We're to lift one another up, encourage one another, and so forth. So first, you mentioned the courage to be real and to be transparent and help people who are overcoming that fear. I think that's one of the biggest issues we have in many of our Christian fellowships and our churches, some of our churches, is that people are afraid. Church or any kind of Christian fellowship should be the safest place for broken sinners to go. But yet, so often it's not. Because the reason I wasn't sharing anything was for fear of judgment. The reason I wasn't revealing what my broken scars were was for fear of judgment. And so I would walk in pretending everything was okay, marriage was okay, kids are okay, when it really wasn't. And so if you can't be real to people, then you just kind of spiral. You really do. So we've got to show up for others. We've got to make it a safe place. I talk to people about having safe brothers or sisters. So really the first thing to do is to make sure you can find someone. If you're isolating and you're holding things in, find someone that you can trust and you can test that out. Not everybody needs to hear the whole story, right? But you need to have some safe people in your life that you can confide in and say, hey, I need you to pray for me. I need you to just listen to me and pray for me, or give me some wise counsel. The second thing you did talk about is, showing up for others and being there for them, non-judging and so forth. And I think that is very key, because so often we do become judgmental. We do look at the other person, because sometimes it makes us feel better about ourselves to look at, when someone else is struggling. But if we're really showing love the way God wants us to show love, we put all of that aside and we make a safe place for people to come to. Not everybody's going to accept us. And I had to realize that as I was beginning to reveal myself and my story, I knew there would be people that would come to me who are dealing with some of the same things, in which that to me was a very revealing opportunity for me to be able to speak into their lives and share with them and to say, you're not alone. We don't need to feel alone, because what we see on social media and what we see when people come into church, 9 times out of 10 is not the real story. There's so much behind the walls of their home, of their lives, of the things that they've gone through. And so we have to realize that we need to be a safe place for people, and we need to be accepting and loving no matter what they've been through.
Which is why I think it takes courage to do that. Because one thing because it brings up the good question of like everything from support meetings to churches to other types of, community meetings where the very same places we say this is where you can come and share your secrets that you can't share anywhere else, or this is where you can share it with exactly what other people are going through. And it's not always a guarantee that that's going to be the safe place. Like and part of it is like, well, why does that happen? I think part of it is because that requires people to realize their own vulnerability, that this could be something that I'm going through, or this could happen to me. Like this isn't just something that I am completely protected from. So that's where then to be vulnerable takes courage
Mhm.
to show up for someone who, and that's where why I like what I do as a counselor is someone could come to me and say, my husband's in prison, and to me, I'm like, how are you how are you doing? Like,
Yeah.
what's it like to be you with that? And sometimes I will realize people don't have that experience because they'll say something and they'll expect me to almost have like a shocked response or to almost have this shame. And to me, that's part of like why counseling is really amazing, to provide that safe space for someone to share and not have that judgment and shame. And it does take courage to show up for people when they are struggling with those things. And I'm really glad that your book sort of highlighted some of those ways and things to do, because I don't think we always talk about that part of it, that it does take courage to show up and to be that support for others. It's not as courageous to shame someone or to, cast pointing a finger. Like that's easy. Like that, I always say if it's easier to do, it takes less courage, takes less strength.
100%.
So I was really happy for you to like kind of see that aspect of it brought into it, because I just don't think it's talked about enough. So I'm really thankful that you actually wrote about that. One thing I wanted to bring up to you too was as I was reading the book, it almost seemed, like there was this CBT approach to spirituality. It sounded like there was like some acceptance into like spirituality combination that you used. There was even words about using, I wrote in this counseling, my counselor in counseling.
Mhm.
So there's always this connection with counseling and spirituality, and I've had other podcast guests who've talked about, this is what counseling does. This is, a difference with here. So often, you reference between the two a couple of times. And we even use words like acceptance, which there's even acceptance and commitment therapy. Acceptance is often used in the recovery world, right? One of the biggest things is accept the things that you cannot change. And so to me, I was curious how do you bring those two together, but also how do you sometimes separate them as to this is the purpose that this serves, this is sometimes they're very much into alignment, sometimes they're not always uh, the same thing. How do you see those as they play a role in all of this, especially in the work that you do, the writing that you do? How do you see that kind of intertwining, but to me, it's like a freeway. Sometimes they run alongside each other. Sometimes they go on different paths. Sometimes they'll join up again later. But I'm kind of curious on your response to that.
They affect each other. So we're talking about emotional health and spiritual health. And I have a diagram in the book called the Four Foundations of Health. And it's the walls of our house, okay, that hold up the roof. So we have our emotional health, our spiritual health, our relational health. And I'm drawing a blank on the fourth one. That's
Physical?
physical. Thank
Yeah,
you.
yeah. It's right
That's
here. I
what I
got
put.
it.
Thank
Got
you.
it.
Thank you. I just kind of froze there for a second because I teach it all the time. But so every single one of those. So you think about our spiritual health. If we're emotionally unhealthy, it does affect our spiritual health because our spiritual health revolves around us being close to the Lord, being in His Word, being able to replace those worldly lies that are thrown at us all the time with scriptural truth. And but if we're like just feeling if we're going through a bout of depression, if we're going through a bout of addiction or something, it's very hard for us to get up and do our quiet time because so often we'll feel like, okay, God, I'm not worthy to be before you today. So there's a lot of things that intertwine. If we're not physically healthy, then we're sick and we're focusing on that. We're not feeling well. So it affects our emotional health. It affects our relational health with others. And they all come together. So if any of those walls are crumbling, so we talk a lot about what does spiritual health really look like and how can I be more spiritually stronger? We're never going to reach perfection. There's going to be a fluctuation at all times, like you said. So we need to focus on, okay, what do I need to do to balance out all of these? And I think, that was one thing with the counselor. I kept a balance sheet and I had, here's what I would, during any given day, I need to say, okay, what can I do for my physical health today? Go for a walk, go to the gym, get up and move, do something. But I've got to do something, that's physically healthy, right? Eat the right things, go, pay attention to that. Then I need to do some things that are spiritual. So I like to start my day in God's word. It helps to ground me just in a better frame of mind when I get up. If I think about the things that I'm thankful for, the blessings that I have, even if I'm going through something bad, I'm sick, if a family member's not well, something bad is happening in a relationship, I can still say, okay, I need to think about the things I can be thankful for and start my day in kind of a spiritually healthy place with the Lord. That emotional health, how am I going to deal with what's going on with my emotions today? Am I angry? Am I bitter? Do I need to deal with some unforgiveness? Do I, whatever. And then the relationships. Is there a relationship that I need to nurture? Or do I need to set a healthy boundary? I deal with so many people so often that say, I've got this family member or this coworker or something that is really just taking me down. And it's okay to set a healthy boundary with this person. You can, communicate that boundary and say, I want to talk to you, but as long as you're going to be yelling and screaming at me, we can't have a communication. So when you want to have a healthy communication or discussion with me, let me know. Until then, we just need some time apart. So you can set those healthy boundaries. But all of those work together. I mean, I'm sure you see it that way too, Andrew, that if we have one of those areas in our life that is really broken down, then it's affecting every other area of our life.
Yeah, I think that's so important to consider. And I like how you point out the different pillars, the house, that the framework as it is mentioned. And one thing too that as I was just flipping through it as we were mentioning it was brought up again, and it's under the four pests of pressure that destroy health. So you have spiritual, emotional, physical, relational, and then you've got a line, and you've got the four pests that destroy it. And three of them make a lot of sense to me: fear, hurt, sin. Then there's shame. And I understand why shame is a pest that destroys health. The reason why I bring it up is I don't understand it is because to me, some people think shame is what will fix these things or what will address these things. Like we still see sometimes people have a very shame-based approach, whether that be community people, whether that's family members, whether that's friends, coworkers, organizations, but there's always still this belief that we can shame people into then fixing these areas when right here, you've got it as a pests that destroy health. So this is not something that is going to alleviate that. This is something that's going to destroy it. I'm sure you've had that experience where you've seen shame. One thing I tell people is I don't think I've ever worked with anyone where if I gave them more shame, this would like they're usually coming in seeing me with plenty of shame. I don't really ask any patient or client, hey, do you think you don't have enough shame? And most of them filled with it, right?
100%.
So from your work, from your experience, can you share it all? Why is it that some people are still stuck into this maybe old way of thinking, or I don't know if there's some historical piece to it, but thinking that shame is what is going to bring healing when most of us see shame as what erodes
Mhm.
relationship, it destroys connection, it poisons health, but yet we see some people who think it's the remedy.
Yeah, no correction. I mean, we think about if we're correcting someone or we're being corrected. Correction says you've done something bad. Shame says you are bad. And so I dealt with shame really truly all my life until in my 40s. I stuffed it, I told myself I was, I just kept trying to rise above it myself in my own strength. But I realized that it was still there. When I would go in and I would teach at church and I would be there telling, teaching on forgiveness, teaching on mercy and grace, teaching that there is no condemnation in Christ Jesus. But yet I would still walk away internally and say, yes, that's very true, but I'm still not worthy. I'm still not worthy of God's love. I'm not worthy of his forgiveness. I had so much self-shame that I was blocking out the goodness and the greatness of God. That was, that's one of those steps. Embracing a life of grace and grasping God's love for you, the G and E steps and courage. But I couldn't do that until I removed the shame and said, yes, I've done bad things. Bad things have happened to me throughout my life, but I'm not bad at the core, and really understanding that, uncovering my true self, the U step in courage, uncovering who I am, who God says I am, not who the world says I am, and not even who I say I am, because we can be our own worst enemy. But that shame is different because it does say, not only maybe have you done something bad, but you are bad. And that is totally destructive because to me, that's an area where a lot of people just say, I give up. I'm never gonna change. I'm never gonna be any better. And when we go in the prison systems and we start working with them, inmates through the 7 steps of courage, what I've found is amazing. They don't share. I when I first was asked to come in and begin teaching, I really thought, okay, these are inmates. They all have brokenness, and they probably are all sharing their brokenness with one another. And what I found is that they're not. They're so afraid of the judgment, and they've been so betrayed throughout their lives that they're convinced that if they share anything with anybody, they're going to be betrayed. And so our classes, we bring anywhere from 15 to 25 inmates together, and we lead a courage from my life class. Then we take them through the 7 steps of courage. We begin with an inventory for them to begin looking at their blessings and accomplishments, because we all have some. We can be good at drawing. We could be good at sports. We've got some accomplishments that we've had in our life, and we've got some blessings. We could have had a wonderful grandmother, or we could have had a dear friend. They're just things that we really need to look at and say, hey, I have had some blessings and accomplishments. But then we look at the detours and the roadblocks at the same time and say, where did you get off the road? Where did that path get turned into a negative direction? Or was there a roadblock? For one of the gals we were working with, a roadblock was she was raised by her grandmother and grandfather, who were very abusive, and especially to one another. And she was in the kitchen with her grandmother and they heard a loud noise, and her grandmother said, go see what your grandfather's done. He's out in the barn. Well, he had taken his life. And so here she is at 8 years old, running out there to find him with the gun, and he's deceased. That was a roadblock for her. I mean, it completely traumatized her and shut her down at 8 years old. And she carried a lot of that pain, obviously, through her teenage years, and ended up with drugs and prostitution and in prison. But to go back to her and say, yes, bad things happened, that doesn't make you bad. Yes, you made some bad decisions along the way. We all have, some worse than others. But you're not bad. God has plans for you. And so then we take them through the commit to change, overcome obstacles, uncover your true self, replace the worldly lies with scriptural truth, accept the things you cannot change, grasp God's love for you, and embrace a life of grace, those 7 steps to courage. And we walk through them very slowly and help each person, each individual, whether we're working with them digitally, in person, or an inmate is leading another inmate through the course. We help them to break down those steps very slowly and embrace each one. And when we come to the end, we look at their new life journey and what are the guardrails that they need to put in place so that they can begin to achieve the things in life that they really do want to achieve and become that person that God wants them to become. They're not going to be perfect. It's going to be some stumbling blocks along the way. But what we have found is they've found a safe place. They've developed some safe relationships that help them walk through these steps and continue every single day. It doesn't matter what day I wake up. I say courage is a choice. I wake up in the morning. I don't know what's ahead of me. Maybe I do know what's ahead of me that day. But if anything happens, I have to wake up with the courage to take those necessary risks, whatever God's telling me to do, whatever change he's calling me to make that day, and trust him with the outcomes. Because sometimes we don't have to know what comes next. God knows. And if we are truly in alignment with what he's calling us to do, then let him work out the details, because he always does. And then we can look back, hindsight's that 2020, and we can say, okay, Lord, I followed you. I was scared. It was like that night I was in Israel. I had no idea how my pastor and his wife would respond. I had no idea how my husband would respond. For all I knew, everything was going to come crashing down. And as a matter of fact, I got up the next morning, we're getting on the tour, and I avoided them like the plague because I was embarrassed. I had revealed all of these broken places in my life in that letter. And now I felt very I don't know, I was insecure. I was just, good Lord, if I could take it back, I would have, right? But I'm so glad I didn't, because it began to change the course of my life that became Courage for Life. And now we are in 39 states in the prison systems working with digital resources and in-person classes. We are around the world with our digital discipleship. I've had opportunities, and now we have audio Bibles that we began to create, all female voice audio Bibles. We have 2 on our app. Worked with Tyndale, one of the greatest Bible publishers, and published 2 Courage for Life Bibles, study Bibles, that are full of those 7 steps to courage and practical application that we can apply to our life on every single scripture page. And now we're working on a teen version. So we have a Courage for Life study Bible for men, a Courage for Life study Bible for women. And in a few years, we're personally working on it right now. We'll have a Courage for Life study Bible for teens. And so God has done so much simply because I was willing to take that first step and reveal the brokenness in my life and ask for help. And sometimes that's just all it is. It's that first step that God's calling you to take.
I wish there was more stories of, you know, like what you received and what others did when it comes to people who did have the courage to show up when other people like yourself took the courage to say something or do something. I know we often talk about how people respond with either shame or blame, and sometimes not the best way, but there's also a lot of good stories of how people, I remember this is a story long time ago now that I just think of how long I've been doing this, but this was probably like 15 years ago. I was working with someone and they were working at a store, substance use history, incarceration. They were working at a store working third shift, and they would get done with working third shift, and a lot of the people at the job would go to a bar for like breakfast and drink. That's part of the third shift life for some people. Instead of getting off of work and going to like a happy hour, like for them it's like breakfast time, and then they're doing that, right? So for so long he kept making reasons why he couldn't go. He'd be like, I got an appointment, or like he did not want to tell them he was in recovery. He didn't really want to tell them that he didn't drink. And why? There was fear of like what they would say. There was fear of would he be made fun of? Would he be encouraged to go? Would they say it's no big deal, it's just one, right? So there's a lot of fear of what would I do if I would say this? And I remember in session, I remember like he kept bringing it up because he's like, I feel like I'm running out of excuses. He's like, I can't I can't keep having all these appointments and everything go on. And me and him kept processing like what it would do to say that and have the conversation, or at least tell them like I'm not going and I'm not going to go. And so then all of a sudden he comes back one day and he tells me that he said something, but not to those people. So I was like, well, what happened? He goes, well, I we got off of work and they were asking about going. I made up another excuse. And he's like, then I was walking to my car and my boss was going to his car. And his boss actually said, hey, I noticed you never go with the guys to the bar. Like you never go with them. And that moment he decided to tell his story. So he actually said, actually, I'm in recovery. I don't drink anymore. I just haven't really felt the strength, the courage to tell them.
Mhm.
And can't imagine this, but the boss's response was, I'm in recovery too. And those two started going to breakfast at like a diner, not a bar, a diner, a couple of times a week. And I think like that story highlights the struggle with courage sometimes from what my client was going through, but also how cool is it to see his boss show up in that way. And I can't guarantee every boss is going to say that, or I can't guarantee every boss is going to respond that way, but the fact that he had a boss that had that courage to, you know, say, yeah, me too, actually. I don't go. So I wish there was more of that ability to sometimes share those stories of when individuals took courage for themselves, but also at times when like other people had the courage to show up for others, especially when there could have been just lined up like many others to not show up that way. So
Sure.
I really, really appreciate that part of it for sure.
That is a
Um,
great story. And I just interject really quickly. When I talk about having safe people, I think we have to pray and ask God to reveal them because at first there was no one I wanted to share with. Even after Johnny and Janet, my counselor had said, I want you to find 10 safe people. And I was just like, my eyes got really big and I'm like, I don't think so. I mean, I don't even want to share this with anybody. He said, no, really, I do. I want you to, it's going to help. And I'm like, okay, let's start a lot lower than that. And he was like, yeah, let's, find two. And then let's see where we can go from there. And today I could tell you 10 people that I can share my life with openly and not feel shame and any kind of condemnation. But I had to just pray about it. And then one of them at the very beginning, she'd actually just lost her son a year before that, from alcoholism. He was 29. And so I had been really just kind of loving on her and ministering to her. But I had prayed about, who is this safe person for me? And the Lord brought her name to mind. And so we went to lunch, and you just kind of have to test the waters a little bit. And she became a really genuine, close friend that was a very safe person in my life that I could just, share anything with. So I say that to anyone in your audience that feels like I can't share this with anybody. It's too scary, to share that with. You don't have to share it with 100 people. Find one person and ask God to reveal that person. And so if you're going into work like this young man was doing, and having to just make up excuses, just ask God to give you that person. I mean, obviously, God provided that opportunity, and He will, that open door, and you'll be amazed what happens. Like you said, it doesn't always work out perfectly each time, and that's okay, because it's okay if somebody judges us. That's their issue, not ours. We just can't give up. We can't. God doesn't want us to stop. He wants us to have the courage to keep on keeping on.
One final question before we conclude, and it was it's towards the end of your book,
Mhm.
and I thought this was quite a unique chapter to end on, and also in connection with the word courage. And the last chapter 17 is titled Find Joy in the Journey. And I thought that was such a unique way of ending it because I I think sometimes we think joy in humor and laughter should just come so easily, that it's something that is just, you watch a movie, you laugh, and you listen to something and a joke, and you have some humor. And yet it does take courage to discover joy sometimes, experience joy, even though we look at it as something that is so profound, so beneficial, and this is so great. It's usually right. What do we think about when we joy is like smile, laughter, good time. So we don't necessarily think that means there needs to be courage to obtain that, but yet a lot of people struggle with joy. And so to see that being your last chapter, I really wanted to point that out and ask you about, how important is that? Because a lot of things that we talk about, a lot of the work that I do, a lot of things that you do comes with a lot of heaviness, a lot of seriousness. And sometimes we think that that is not where joy belongs because this is serious stuff, or this is the hard things. And yet you talk exactly about the need for joy and that courage. And here's a quote: courage is choosing joy in the midst of all circumstances. And yet we often really don't use joy in some of the language when it comes to these issues that we deal with. So I don't have a specific question about that, but I guess, how important is it that we include joy when we have these conversations around courage and talk about when people are going through these circumstances, why joy is necessary versus some people think, well, once I travel this journey, once I get to this destination, fix this problem, get this goal, then I'll experience joy as like a reward or a prize for this. When you say this is joy while going through all that.
Mhm. It is. It truly is. And there's a difference between joy and happiness. As we know, happiness can be fleeting. It's just a temporary, situation. Joy we can embrace at all times. And a lot of times I can even, if I can't find it in something else, I find it in my relationship with the Lord. So we have to look for joy. It doesn't mean we're going to always get up feeling, positive. I mean, no matter how many times I've taught this, no matter how many times I've exercised the 7 steps of courage and all of the steps, because the more you teach it, the more ingrained it becomes in you. I don't always wake up feeling joyful in the morning. And so sometimes I have to start my day with an attitude of gratitude and say, okay, this may be going wrong, but let me just focus for a moment on what's going right. What can I be thankful for, whether it's my health or whether it's my grandkids' health or whether it's, there's little things that we can always find joy, even when things aren't going well for us. And so it's vital because it really affects everything else we do. It is our emotion, and it's a big part of our emotional health, how we put everything into perspective. I was actually talking to my friend, a mentor, yesterday, because as a leader of the ministry, he's on our board of directors, and he and another board member, I have an every other week call with them. How's your balance going? How's your physical, your emotional, your relational, and your work schedule? How's all of that balancing out? And how are you doing? And I was just saying, I really have to say to myself, have realistic expectations. I need to sometimes modify my expectations on how I think things should go, because they don't always go that way. And so if I'm not just expecting everything to be, beautiful and roses, and for my husband to say all the nice things that I want him to say, maybe he's in a bad mood, maybe he's having a hard day. It puts me in a better perspective, so I can find joy. And if I start my day there in certain things and gratitude, it just puts me in a better place for everything else in life. And we talked about earlier briefly, and I know we're coming to a close, but being able to act instead of react, that is so key in everything we do. Because when someone comes at us with a criticism or a difficult situation, if we react, 9 times out of 10, it's not a very good reaction for me or anybody else. Just I can fly off the handle, and then I'll go, okay, I should have stopped. I should have kind of looked at this a little better and dial back in. So yeah, joy is critical. It's important. We close with that. We talk about communication in the book and kind of close with all of that. But these are steps that we take every single day, practical steps that no matter what God's calling us to change, we can accomplish it, and we can accomplish it with joy, even in the midst of the difficulty.
Yeah, I'm glad you wrote about that because I think there's a lot of like misunderstandings about joy, the idea of, waiting for it until you accomplish something or get to a certain point along the way, or that, what we're talking about is so serious or so heavy that that's not where joy belongs. And I really like the connection of courage to have the joy no matter what the circumstances are. I think is something that is a message a lot of people could benefit to hear from, and to see it being like the last chapter was pretty amazing to see where that showed up. So I wanted to ask you about that. All right, so great conversation. What is a lasting message or something final you'd like to share with listeners who we'll make sure they know where they can learn more about you, connect with you. But what's a final takeaway you'd like to give to listeners?
Final takeaway is, no matter what you're going through, whatever step you need to take, if it's with your job, if it's with your relationship, if it's with your family, no matter what God is calling you to change in your life, it is possible, and you do have the courage to do it. All you need to do is take that first step, make that commitment, that C step in courage. Look at the obstacles that are in your way and how are you going to overcome them. Take that first step today. Don't wait any longer and change the course of your life. And you can find out more about us at courageforlife.org. You can also download our free audio Bible app that has all of our resources, access to all of our teaching videos, all of our discipleship information. And it is the Courage for Life Bible that is on any Apple or Android device. It's the best way to get in touch with us, either there or our website. Of course, we're on Facebook and Instagram, and our YouTube channel has all our teachings. Everything's free. So, except for the printed resources, but you can find out more about us there. We'd love to have you check us out, and we'd love to pray for you. We have a prayer team that prays. So let us help to give you the courage you need to take that step toward true freedom and an abundant life that God wants you to live.
The book is Courage for Life, Discover a Life Full of Confidence, Hope, and Opportunity. And thank you so much for joining. And I think listeners are going to get a much better idea of what we mean when we say the word courage, and a lot more that they may have not expected to learn about it and understand. So thank you so much for the work you're doing, the book you wrote, and for joining in this conversation.
Thank you, Andrew. It's great to be with you.
Quick ask before I let you go. If this show is worth your time, it's worth 30 seconds to write a review on Apple Podcasts. Tap the stars, leave a sentence or two. It helps more people find us. I read every single one of them, and I look forward to reading yours.
You've been listening to Talking Addiction and Recovery with Andrew J. Schreier. We're so glad you've joined us and invite you to connect further with the show and these topics at www.andrewjschreier.com. That's AndrewJSCHREIER.com. You can also email us directly at talkingaddictionandrecovery@gmail.com and connect on social media, Instagram at Talking Addiction and Recovery, Facebook Talking Addiction and Recovery Podcast, and Twitter at TalkAR_podcast. To stay connected and never miss an episode, be sure to like, rate, and subscribe. Until next time, friends, let's keep talking addiction and recovery.